The Ossuary Bloom, Chapter 9, Rust and Ruin. The air in Hroldar workshop was a thick, humid cocktail of decay. It smelled of wet metal, the sweet rot of hydroponic algae, and the sharp ozonic tang of failing electronics. Aris Thorne ran a hand over his face, the grit on his palm scraping against a 3-day-old beard. Every surface in the cramped space was a monument to scavenging, walls patched with mismatched plating, shelves overflowing with salvaged components, and a workbench that was a chaotic altar of wires, soldering irons, and dismantled data chips. The only light came from a single stuttering lumen strip that cast their shadows long and skeletal against the corroded bulkhead. Hroldar Brecker, a man built of sinew and suspicion, was cleaning a plasma cutter with a grimy rag, his movements sharp and efficient. His silence was a physical presence in the room, more damning than any accusation. Across the makeshift table, Vespera sat perfectly still, her spine straight, a stark figure of disciplined order amidst the rust garden's chaos. Her architect's training was a ghost she couldn't exorcise. It clung to her posture, to the careful, deliberate way she watched the data pad floating between them. "The plan is flawed," she said, her voice cutting through the low hum of Hroldar jury-rigged power converter. The datapad displayed a dizzying schematic of the ossuary's lower levels, a labyrinth of conduits and structural supports. "We can bypass the physical checkpoints. Hroldar roots are sound, but the archive itself, it's not just locked, it's sealed in a way you can't comprehend." Hroldar let out a short, derisive sound, not quite a laugh. "Try me. I've cracked every kind of lock this station has coughed up since its glory days." "Not this kind," Vespera countered, her gaze unwavering. "The security isn't just software. It's ideological. It's keyed to the neural patterns of specific, high-ranking architects. The system doesn't just check for a password. It checks that you believe you belong there. Any hesitation, any flicker of doubt, and it triggers a full mem-wipe of the sector. You wouldn't even know you'd failed. You'd just stop being you."
Aris felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. The great stillness, weaponized. A lock that erased you for having the wrong thoughts. He leaned closer, his own obsession a magnetic pull towards the glowing schematic. The archive was down there. The truth, the answer to the phantom of his wife, Lyra, that now lived behind his eyes. "So it's impossible," Hroldar grunted, tossing the rag onto the bench. "We're done before we've started." "No," Vespera said, slowly, deliberately. "There is a vulnerability, a design flaw, you could call it, a ghost in the machine." She looked from Hroldar to Aris, her expression unreadable. "His name is Valerius Otho." The name dropped into the humid air and hung there, obscene. Hroldar went rigid. The casual way he'd been leaning against the workbench vanished, replaced by the coiled tension of a predator. "An architect," he spat, the words tasting like poison. "You want to bring an architect into this? Are you echo-lost?" "Valerius is different," Vespera began, but Hroldar cut her off. "Different how? Does he bleed gold instead of blue? Does he harmonize people with a gentler touch before casting them out into this irradiated scrap heap?" He gestured wildly at the workshop, at the weeping pipes and fungal blooms that were his home. "I've seen what your different architects do.
I buried neighbors who got a different kind of reassignment. There is no such thing." "He was exiled," Vespera insisted, her voice rising slightly, losing its clinical edge. "He was my mentor once, a theorist, a brilliant one. He believed resonance was a natural evolution of consciousness, not a corruption. He argued for study, not suppression. For that heresy, the current regime disgraced him, stripped him of his rank, and locked him away in the upper residential spires. He hates them. He hates them more than you do." Aris watched them, a silent arbiter in a war of belief. Hroldar's fury was a raw, honest thing, born from the slow decay and systemic cruelty of the rust gardens. Vespera's logic was a scalpel, precise and desperate. She was offering a key forged in the very system she had just fled. Inside Aris's head, a whisper, soft as static. "She's right, Aris. You need the truth. Whatever it takes." It was Lyra's voice, or the memory of it, now a permanent parasitic echo in his mind.
"He designed the Archive's foundational security protocols," Vespera pressed, her eyes locking onto Aris. She knew who the real decision-maker was. The memlocks, the neural keys, it was all his theoretical work. If anyone knows how to build a key to bypass it, it's him. "And you trust him?" Hroldar's voice was dangerously low. "You who wore their sigil yesterday? You trust one of them not to sell us out for a taste of his old life?" "I don't trust him," Vespera said, her hands clenching into fists on her lap. "I trust his hatred. It's the only currency the architects have that can't be rewritten." The hum of the converter filled the silence. A drop of condensation fell from a pipe overhead, striking a metal plate with a sharp tink that made Aris flinch. He saw the path forward, a dark, narrow tunnel, with Hroldar's righteous anger on one side and Vespera's cold pragmatism on the other, and at the end of it, the Archive. An answer, an end to the haunting. He had seen what the architects did. He had watched them suppress the resonance event, their silver-masked enforcers moving with brutal efficiency, erasing a flicker of consciousness as if it were an inconvenient stain. Hroldar was right. They were the enemy. But Lyra's echo was a fever in his blood. It demanded a cure, and the cure was truth. "We use him," Aris said. His own voice sounded distant, hollow. Hroldar turned his head slowly, his eyes burning with betrayal, fixing on Aris. "What?" "She's right," Aris continued, forcing strength into his tone. He wouldn't let them see his fracture, the desperation that was eating him alive. "This isn't about trust, it's about utility. Otho isn't an ally, he's a tool, a specialized key we can't forge ourselves." He looked at Hroldar, trying to project a certainty he didn't feel. "We go to him, we get what we need to bypass the security, and then we are done with him. He is a means to an end, nothing more." Hroldar stared at him for a long, heavy moment. The air crackled with his unspoken rage. He looked at Aris not as an ally, but just as another kind of architect, someone willing to use anyone, to justify any risk for his own obsessive quest. "You're a fool, Thorne," Hroldar said, his voice flat and dead. "You think you can handle a snake without getting bitten. You talk just like they do." He turned his back on them both, picking up the plasma cutter again. He didn't throw it. He didn't shout. The quiet, deliberate way he resumed his work was worse. It was a wall of ice,
The alliance, forged in shared desperation, had just sustained its first critical fracture. A plan was in place, but the foundation of their unity was already cracked, and Aris knew with a sickening certainty that it was his fault. The decision was made. They would hunt a ghost, and Aris could only pray it wouldn't lead them all to their graves. The data den smelled of ozone and desperation. It was a cramped alcove carved out of corroded bulkhead, nestled deep in the warren of Athelgard's lower levels, where the official grid maps simply surrendered to a scrawl of unregulated territory. The air, thick enough to chew, carried the cloying sweetness of burnt sugar from a noodle vendor's stall, and the ever-present metallic tang of recycled water weeping from a stained pipe overhead. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed with an eerie turquoise light in the cracks, casting the faces of the three fugitives in a sickly aquatic glow. Vespera ignored it all. The world had compressed to the 10 inches of the flickering, jury-rigged console before her. It was a monstrosity of scavenged parts, a cracked cryopod display grafted onto the guts of a nutrient paste dispenser, powered by a whining, unstable capacitor that hummed like a trapped insect. Her own architect-issued datapad was useless here, a beacon that would have screamed her location to every security node on the station. This black market terminal was a ghost, a filthy, untraceable window into the system she once served. Her fingers, long and practiced, hovered over the glowing glyphs of the input field. Her breath was a shallow, controlled rhythm in her chest. Beside her, Hroldar shifted his weight, the worn leather of his scavenger rig creaking like the station's groaning bones. He was a monument to impatient anxiety. "Status, Lyrian," he rumbled, his voice a low gravel that grated on her frayed nerves. "We're not exactly invisible down here. The dregs trade whispers as easily as they trade echoes." "Quiet," Vespera snapped, not looking at him. Her eyes were locked on the screen, where lines of pristine, familiar code scrolled past. The great stillness, order, purity. It was the digital language of her faith, the elegant logic she had dedicated her life to upholding. Now she was using it as a burglar's tool. Aris Thorne, standing a few feet back in the deepest shadows, spoke with a strained quiet. "The system, it won't fight back against you?" A humorless puff of air escaped Vespera's lips. "It will try. It's designed to identify and excise anomalies. Right now," she murmured, her fingers beginning to move, a blur of precise staccato taps, "I am the anomaly." She plunged in. It wasn't a brute force attack. That was clumsy, loud. This was surgery. She slipped her access credentials, still active, a terrifying oversight on her mentor's part, into the handshake protocol. But she didn't use the front door. She used a service port she'd designed herself 5 years ago, a diagnostic backdoor for harmonization system calibration, a key only she possessed. The screen flickered, and a security warning flared in amber text, "Unauthorized port access, logging signature." Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was already on a clock. She had seconds, not minutes. With her left hand, she initiated a recursive loop, a simple but resource-heavy command that would make her signature appear to be a common system glitch, a resonance echo in the data stream. It was a crude trick, but it would buy her time. Her right hand flew, navigating menus she knew by memory, not by sight. Architect registry, Personnel, decommissioned assets. Come on, Valerius, she thought, her internal voice a strained whisper. Where did you run to? The list of names scrolled past, a digital graveyard of the disgraced and the erased. The system was fighting her now. Each command was met with a microsecond of lag as security subroutines probed her connection, sniffing for the intruder. She could feel them, like phantom fingers brushing against the back of her neck. The terminal's fan whined, climbing in pitch. The ozone smell intensified. "It's getting hot," Hroldar noted, placing a hand on the console's casing and pulling it back with a grunt. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster."
I am rewriting my digital DNA on a live network while holding a conversation, Vespera retorted through gritted teeth. A little focus would be appreciated. She found him. Otho, Valerius. Status, retired. Voluntary isolation. Retired. A euphemism. Valerius Otho had been one of the most brilliant minds behind the second-generation resonance suppression fields. Then he'd started asking questions. He'd spoken out against the escalating intensity of the neural harmonizations. He hadn't been erased, merely archived. His location data was triple encrypted, a dead end for any normal inquiry. But Vespera wasn't normal. She was the architect of this very prison. She knew the flawed bricks. Her fingers danced. She wasn't typing commands anymore. She was composing a new truth. She built a false authorization query, signing it with the digital signature of her former commander, a man she now considered her enemy. She fed the query into the encryption layer, and for a terrifying second, the entire screen went blank. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of condensation and the frantic thumping of her own pulse. "Vespera?" Aris's voice was tight with alarm. And then it appeared, a single line of text on the black screen, a geotag. Geotag LVL097. Sector null. Designate the sump. The sump. A cold knot formed in Vespera's stomach. It was the station's bilge, a forgotten level beneath the rust gardens, where all of Aethelgard's toxic runoff and failed experiments were left to rot. No one went there voluntarily. It was a place you went to disappear, to die. She'd found him. Relief, cold and sharp, cut through her anxiety. But it was fleeting, replaced by a new urgency. On a hidden partition of the display that only she could see, a new icon blinked, a tiny pulsating hourglass, a system integrity sweep, the automated patrol. It was 2 minutes out. No, not now. Now came the hard part, the escape. She couldn't just pull the plug. Her digital ghost would remain, a breadcrumb trail leading directly to this terminal, to them. She had to scrub the memory of her ever having been there.
Her hands became a blur. She reversed her path, command by command, collapsing the false query, deleting the temporary access logs, unraveling the recursive loop that was masking her signature. Each keystroke had to be perfect. One mistake, one misplaced character, and the entire structure would crash, triggering every alarm from here to the Viridius Spire. The hourglass icon pulsed faster. 1 minute. Sweat trickled down her temple, stinging her eye. She didn't blink. The stench of ozone was now acrid, burning. The terminal groaned, the screen flickering violently. Hroldar took an involuntary step back. 30 seconds. She was back at the entry port. She typed the final command sequence, the one that would sever her connection and simultaneously delete the port's short-term cache. It was like pulling the pin on a grenade and trying to reinsert it in the dark. Execute. Terminate. She slammed her palm down on the disconnect rune. The screen died instantly. plunging them into the dim fungal glow of the alcove. The terminal's fan sputtered and fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening, broken only by the steady drip, drip, drip. Vespera slumped back against the cold metal wall, her entire body trembling with adrenaline. She held up a hand in the gloom. It was shaking uncontrollably. She had broken into her own house, stolen a secret, and walked out the front door, leaving it, she prayed, exactly as she had found it. "Did you?" Aris started, his voice barely a whisper. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the foul air a balm of victory. The anxious apprehension that had coiled in her gut for hours finally unspooled, leaving behind the hollow, ringing ache of focused relief. "I have him," she said, her voice hoarse. She pushed herself off the wall, her legs unsteady. "Valerius Otho, he's in the sump." Hroldar let out a low curse. "Echo lost fool, of course he is. The only place on this station worse than the gardens." He looked from Vespera's pale face to Aris's grim expression. Getting to him is going to be its own special kind of hell. Vespera clenched her trembling hand into a fist. She had done it. She had committed a final, irrevocable act of treason. There was no going back. Looking at her own hand, she no longer saw the disciplined tool of an architect. She saw the weapon of a revolutionary, and it terrified her as much as it empowered her.
The data den was a crypt for forgotten information. Aris sat on a crate in a quiet corner, the air thick with the competing stinks of Ethelbard, the ozone tang of overworked server racks, the cloying sweetness of the nutrient paste Hroldar had left them, and beneath it all, the faint formaldehyde promise of the ossuary levels seeping through the ventilation. He was waiting for Vespera. She was off interfacing with some black market contact, using her old architect codes to secure a meeting with the exiled Valerius Otho. Trust. It was a fragile currency, and they were spending it recklessly. A flickering neon tube on the far wall painted the cramped space in stuttering strokes of blue and gray. It cast long dancing shadows that made the stacks of decommissioned hardware look like monolithic tombstones. The only other sounds were the incessant hum of the station's dying heart and the rhythmic drip of condensation somewhere in the ceiling, a slow, maddening water clock counting down to nothing. Aris ran a hand over his face, the rasp of his stubble loud in the quiet. He was exhausted. A bone-deep weariness that had little to do with sleep and everything to do with the weight of his choices. He stared at a dark monitor screen, its surface a black mirror reflecting a distorted, hollow-eyed version of himself. He looked echo-lost, a man already half gone. He closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, letting the darkness be a balm. And that was when he smelled it. Not ozone, not decay. It was the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the orbital greenhouses on Triton, a scent that hadn't graced his senses in a decade, a scent inextricably tied to her, Lyra. His eyes snapped open. The reflection in the monitor was no longer his own. She was there, standing behind where he sat, just as she used to when he worked late in his lab. Her form was translucent, woven from the flickering blue light and the deep shadows, but every detail was agonizingly perfect. The way a loose strand of dark hair fell across her brow, the gentle curve of her lips turned down in an expression of profound concern. She wasn't an echo of death. She was a memory made manifest, vibrant and whole. His breath hitched, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The scientist in him screamed, hallucination, neural implant damage, stress-induced psychosis. But the man, the husband, was drowning in a flood of desperate,
soul-crushing hope. She took a step, her form shimmering, her feet making no sound on the grated floor. She looked so worried. For him. Aris. Her voice was not the distorted, fragmented signal of a resonance event. It was clear, intimate, a sound that traveled not through the air, but bloomed directly in the center of his mind. My love, you look so tired. He couldn't speak. He could only stare, drinking in the impossible sight of her. The guilt was a physical thing, a stone in his throat. He had done this to her. His ambition, his obsession. I'm so worried, she continued, her spectral eyes darting toward the doorway Vespera had disappeared through. About her. The name hung unspoken in the space between them. Vespera. She's an architect, Aris. Lyra's voice was a silken thread of reason woven around a core of pure poison. Their training. It's a kind of death. They carve out everything that makes a person real. Empathy, loyalty, love. They replace it with stillness, an empty, orderly room. They don't just change. Aris shook his head, a tiny, involuntary motion. No, Vespera had risked everything. She'd turned against her own people. She had seen the truth in that hijacked harmonization. She had seen Lyra's echo speak with her own dead grandmother's voice. As if reading his thoughts, Lyra's expression softened into one of pity. They are masters of the long game, my love. They know your grief. They know she looks like a savior to you, a repentant soldier. But a viper doesn't change its nature just because it sheds its skin. He wanted to argue. He wanted to shout that Vespera was their only way to Otho, their only path to the archive. But the words wouldn't come. His own paranoia, a constant low-level hum beneath his thoughts, was now vibrating at a higher frequency, resonating with her words.
Lyra drifted closer, the scent of jasmine growing stronger, more intoxicating. She knelt beside his crate, bringing her face level with his. Her eyes, those beautiful, familiar eyes, held a galaxy of sadness. This man she's taking you to, Otho, he's not what you think. I can feel the station's memory, Aris, the things they try to erase. He wasn't exiled for dissent. He was the one they sent when an experiment went wrong, when a resonance event became too personal. He wasn't a scientist. He was an executioner, a specialist in permanent erasure. He silences echoes, Aris. He won't help you find me. He will help her destroy me. The logic was flawless. It was terrifyingly, seductively logical. Of course the architects would have a specialist for that. Of course they would plant him as bait for anyone who got too close to the truth. Vespera, the loyal technocrat, leading the desperate researcher to the butcher. It was a perfect trap. Aris's hands clenched into fists. His knuckles were white. The hum of the station seemed to fade, replaced by the roaring of blood in his ears. He could feel the fine hairs on his arms standing on end. The vision was so real, so complete. The damage to his implant must be worse than he'd imagined. It was taking his deepest fears and giving them his wife's face. Her spectral hand rose, and for a heart-stopping second she thought she would touch him.
He could almost feel the phantom coolness of her fingers against his cheek. He flinched. The wistful memory of her, so warm and comforting only moments ago, had curdled into something cold and sharp. This wasn't a haunting of love, it was a haunting of doubt. "You can't trust her, Aris," Lyra pleaded, her voice breaking with manufactured sorrow. "You can't trust her. She will lead you to a quiet room, and Otho will sever our connection forever. Then you will truly be alone. Please, please, don't let them take me from you again." He felt a tremor run through his entire body. He squeezed his eyes shut. "Lyra!" The name was a choked whisper, barely audible. He had spoken. He had responded. The line was blurring, dissolving. The world of memory and the world of metal and decay were becoming one. He heard a sound from the corridor, the scrape of a boot. Vespera was coming back. Lyra's image flickered, her expression turning urgent, almost angry.
"Don't tell her you saw me," she commanded, her voice suddenly hard. "Pretend. For me. For us." And then, as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. The scent of jasmine vanished, ripped away and replaced by the stale, metallic air of the den. The blue light from the neon tube seemed harsh and empty now. The dark monitor reflected only him, a pale, sweat-sheened man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. The warmth of her presence was gone, but the chilling paranoia remained, a shard of ice lodged in his heart. Vespera walked in, her face set in a grim, determined expression. She didn't seem to notice the change in him. "It's done," she said, her voice low and efficient. "Otho will meet us. He's agreed to help." Aris looked at her, at this woman who had betrayed her entire world for this cause, this woman who was risking erasure to help him find the truth, and all he could hear was Lyra's whisper. "A viper doesn't change its nature just because it sheds its skin." He forced a nod, the motion stiff and unnatural. "Good," he managed to say, his voice rough. "That's good." But his eyes were cold, and his trust, once a flickering flame, had been all but extinguished. The groan of protesting metal was the only sound as Hroldar put his shoulder into the pry bar. With a final piercing shriek, the maintenance hatch tore free from its rusted frame and clanged onto the deck plating. Beyond it was not a corridor, but a maw, a wound in Aethelgard's skin, exhaling a breath of rot and cold humidity. "Stillness upon you," Hroldar grunted, the traditional greeting dripping with a thick layer of sarcasm. He gestured into the darkness with the bar. "Ladies first." Vespera stared into the opening, her face a pale, tight mask under the flickering emergency light. The perfect posture of her architect training seemed to brittle in the face of this raw decay. "This is unsanctioned access. The structural integrity logs for these sublevels haven't been updated in 50 years. "No kidding," Hroldar shot back, his voice low and gravelly. "That's the point. No logs, no sensors. No one's looking for us down here because they think the station already ate this place. Now move. We're on a clock."
He didn't wait for her. Dropping through the hatch with the practiced ease of a man who called such places home. His light pack flickered to life, a weak cone of white cutting a nervous path through the gloom. Vespera took a centering breath, her expression one of profound distaste, and followed him down. I was the last. My hand rested on the cold metal of the frame, the rust flaking away under my fingers like dried blood. This felt like a threshold, a point of no return. We were leaving the station of rules and order, even the broken version I knew, and entering the tomb beneath. I dropped down,
landing with a soft thud on a narrow catwalk. The air was a physical presence. It was thick with the metallic tang of recycled water gone foul, the cloying sweetness of decay, and a low chemical bite that reminded me of the ossuary's preservation fluids. The constant low hum of the station's life support was gone, replaced by a symphony of terminal illness. The slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of condensation, the sigh of stressed metal, and a deep, intermittent groan from the station's very bones, like a leviathan in its death throes. Our world became the narrow game of Hroldar's light. It slid over pipes weeping rust-colored tears, and walls blooming with patches of eerie blue-green bioluminescent fungi. The Gothic arches that defined Aethelgard's upper levels were still present, but here they were skeletal, stripped of all grandeur and wrapped in a shroud of cabling and conduits. It was a cathedral of failure. "Stay close. Watch your feet," Hroldar commanded, his voice barely disturbing the oppressive quiet. The catwalk shuddered under my weight. I looked down, past the corroded grating, into a chasm of absolute black. Aethelgard wasn't just a station. It was a layered grave, and we were descending through its oldest, most forgotten plots. The fear I'd been holding at bay began to seep in, cold and heavy. It wasn't the fear of being caught by the architects. It was something more primal. The fear of being swallowed by this place, of becoming another one of its forgotten echoes. We reached a gap where a section of the walkway had completely rusted through. A chasm, maybe 2 meters wide, separated us from the other side. Hroldar didn't even break stride. He took a running start and leaped, landing with a grunt on the other side. He turned, shining his light back at us. "Well, it's not getting any smaller."
Vespera stood frozen at the edge, her gaze locked on the drop. For all her discipline and unwavering belief in the architect's control, she was a creature of their curated reality. This was real. This was chaos. The great stillness held no power here. "I can't," she started, her voice a thin thread. "Yes, you can," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. I moved to her side. "Don't look down. Look at him." I pointed to Hroldar. "Just focus on the other side." My own heart hammered against my ribs. My mind, a traitorous engine of association, dredged up the memory of another precipice, another moment of choice. Lyra, her face pale, not with fear, but with disappointment. "Is this worth it, Aris?" The thought was an ice pick in my skull. I shoved it down. This had to be worth it. I took a few steps back, took a deep breath that tasted of mold and ozone, and ran. The leap felt like an eternity. For a horrifying second, my boot skidded on the corroded landing, and my arms flailed. Hroldar's hand shot out, grabbing my forearm in a grip like a vice. He hauled me forward. "Echo-lost fool," he muttered, letting me go. "Trying to get yourself killed before the fun part." I ignored him, turning back to Vespera. "Your turn." She stood there for another long moment. Then, with a sudden sharp exhalation, she ran. Her leap was clumsy, desperate, but she cleared it, stumbling into me as she landed. I steadied her. Her whole body was trembling, but her eyes held a new, hard glint. The illusion of her old world was being stripped away, layer by painful layer. We continued our descent. The air grew colder, heavier. The drips became streams, running in rivulets along the walls. A sudden violent hiss erupted from a pipe above us, spewing a cloud of scalding steam.
We flattened ourselves against the wall, the heat washing over us. The pipe shuddered, then fell silent, leaving only the sound of sizzling water on the deck. "Charming," Vespera said, her voice tight. "The pinnacle of architect engineering." "They stopped caring about this level when the colony failed," Hroldar said, his light dancing across a support beam that was more rust than metal. "Just another secret they buried."
Valerius Otho, the exiled architect, our guide to the archive. The thought of him choosing to hide in this place spoke volumes of his desperation. As we walked, the groans of the station began to take on a strange cadence, a rhythmic, discordant music. In the patter of the water, I started to hear patterns, syllables, whisperings. Aris. I stopped, straining my ears. The sound was gone, replaced by the mundane drip, drip, drip. "What is it?" Vespera whispered, her hand hovering near the sidearm holstered at her waist. "Nothing," I lied, forcing myself to move. "Thought I heard something." "It's the pressure," I told myself. "The lack of sleep, the resonance, is making you sensitive." My neural implant, the very tool of my trade, felt like a live wire in my skull, a receiver tuning itself to a phantom station. I was becoming echo-lost. The station's decay was mirroring my own. The thought was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. I was part of this collapse. My quest for truth was just another symptom of the sickness. Finally, Hroldar stopped. He clicked off his light pack, plunging us into a near-total darkness broken only by the faint, ghostly glow of the fungi. He pointed down. We had reached a broken balcony, a viewing platform from a forgotten age. Below us lay the sump. It wasn't a room. It was a cavern. A vast, bowl-shaped chamber at the bottom of the station's substructure, half flooded with stagnant black water. Broken machinery and catwalks jutted from the surface like the bones of long-dead creatures. The air that rose from it was thick with the foul promise of oblivion. And in the center of it all, on a small, isolated island of machinery, a single weak light flickered. A campfire in the belly of the beast. Otho. The tense silence of our journey was gone, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating dread. This wasn't just a forgotten level of the station. This was its bilge, its grave. We hadn't just been walking through corridors. We had been descending into Ethelgard's subconscious, a place of rot and repressed memories. And down there, in the heart of the darkness, our truth was waiting.
The sump was Ethelgard's forgotten basement, a place where gravity felt heavier and the air tasted of rust and regret. We navigated a labyrinth of corroded maintenance shafts, the station's perpetual hum a low growl in the gut of the world. Water thick with mineral deposits wept from stressed seams in the ceiling, each drop echoing like a ticking clock. Patches of sickly green bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting our faces in the ghoulish light of a long-dead star. Ahead, our path terminated at a wall that did not belong. Where there should have been crumbling plasteel and exposed conduits, there was a slab of welded, cross-braced durasteel. Scorch marks blossomed around its edges like black flowers, testament to failed attempts at entry. A single grimy optical lens, no larger than a fist, sat embedded above the seam, its iris a malevolent red dot. Exposed power cables, thick as my arm, snaked from the ceiling and plugged directly into the bulkhead, which thrummed with a low, predatory energy. "Well," Hroldar grunted, his voice a gravelly scrape in the quiet, "is not subtle." Vespera stood motionless, her face a mask of clinical focus. Her eyes traced the power conduits, the weld patterns, the jury-rigged camera. She was an architect analyzing a flaw in the system, even if that flaw was another architect. "The power draw is immense," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It's leaching from a primary substation. Whatever defenses he has, they are not for show." My own exhaustion was a physical weight, pulling at my shoulders, clouding my thoughts. We had come this far on a sliver of hope that Valerius Otho, the disgraced architect who first theorized the deep structures of resonance before being exiled for heresy, was our key. Now faced with his fortress, that hope felt thin and brittle. "He has to listen," I said, more to myself than to them. "He wanted to understand resonance. We can give him that." Hroldar scoffed. "People like that don't listen. They shoot. Let me try." He stepped forward, raising a hand to bang on the metal. "Wait," Vespera commanded, her arm shooting out to stop him. "Let Aris speak. Otho was a theorist, a scholar. Brute force will only confirm his fears."
I nodded, grateful. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the station's steady thrum. I stepped closer to the unfeeling red eye of the camera, feeling its scrutiny like a physical touch. "Valerius Otho?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. We need to speak with you. It's about resonance. We have information, proof that your theories were correct." For a long moment, there was only the drip of water and the hum of the door. Despair began to curdle in my gut. Then a crackle of static erupted from a hidden speaker grill, so loud it made us all flinch. "Go away," a voice rasped, layered with distortion and the dry rustle of age. It was the sound of a man who had not spoken to another soul in years. "There is nothing for you here but a quick end." "We're not your enemies," I insisted, trying to keep the desperation from my tone. "The architects, they're trying to weaponize it. The mass resonance event in the ossuary, it was a test. They're losing control." The static hissed. "The architects!" The name was spat like a poison. "You dare stand before my door and speak their name? You dare bring one of their pristine little puppets with you?" My blood ran cold. I glanced back at Vespera. Her face was pale in the green glow, her composure finally cracking. Otho's camera had seen her, recognized the severe cut of her uniform, the rigid posture drilled into her by the order that had cast him out. "I know her kind," the voice seethed, the words coming faster now. "The perfect posture, the unwavering gaze that sees only heresy and chaos. They sent you to finish the job, didn't they? My exile wasn't enough. Now they want my silence, the great stillness made absolute." "You're wrong," Vespera said, her voice steady despite the accusation. "I am no longer one of them. I saw what they did. I am helping him." "Ha ha ha!" The laughter was horrific through the speaker, a dry hacking noise like grinding metal. "Helping him?
An architect helps no one but the order. You are a lie nested in a uniform, a weapon disguised as a truce. I will not be your fool."
Suddenly, with a sharp pneumatic hiss, a section of the wall to the left of the door slid away. A multi-barreled automated turret emerged from the recess, its sleek, dark casing a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. It swiveled with unnerving fluidity, a trio of targeting lasers painting crimson dots on our chests. One settled directly over my heart. The low whir of its servos was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Hroldar slowly raised his hands, his cynical bravado melting away in the face of imminent, automated death. "Okay, easy now. This is Sentry Gideon," Otho's voice crackled, laced with a terrifying, triumphant pride. "A relic from the colony archives, far more definitive than the crowd suppression models the architects favor. It does not harmonize, it atomizes." The red dot on my chest felt like a hot coal. My mind flashed to Lyra, to the promise I'd made to understand, to make things right. To die here, at the door of the one man who might have answers, was a failure so profound it was almost absurd. "Otho, please," I begged, my voice cracking. "We are trying to find the primary archive, the foundational data from the colonization project, the truth of Kepler 186F, the truth of what they brought back. You dedicated your life to this. Don't let them be the only ones who know." There was a pause. The hum of the turret seemed to grow louder, filling the silence. For a heartbeat, I thought my words had reached him. "The archive," he whispered, the sound freighted with a terrible awe. Then the paranoia slammed back into place. "A trick, a lure for a desperate old man. You will not have me. You will not have my work." The turret's barrels began to spin, emitting a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the floor plates. "Move!" Hroldar roared, shoving Vespera and me back toward the corridor we'd come from. "You have 10 seconds to vacate this corridor," Otho's voice declared, cold and final. 10, 9, 8. We scrambled back, stumbling over loose pipes and slick patches of algae. The red dots followed us, unwavering. My breath hitched in my throat. We ducked behind a massive, rusted support pillar just as the count reached 3, 2, 1.
There was no blast, only the sound of the turret retracting and the heavy panel sliding shut. A final, sharp click echoed in the silence, followed by the deep hum of the door, as impenetrable as before. We were left in the green-tinged darkness, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Hroldar leaned against the pillar, wiping sweat from his brow. "Echo lost fanatic," he muttered. "He's terrified," Vespera said, her gaze fixed on the bulkhead down the hall. "He's been alone for years, stewing in his theories and his hate for the order. My presence was a confirmation of his worst fears." "So that's it?" I asked, the despair a leaden weight in my stomach. "We're done? He won't listen?" "No," Vespera said, a new intensity in her eyes. She turned to me. "He used the word sanctify, and he named the sentry Gideon. Those aren't just words. They're from the old architect catechisms, the doctrinal texts from before the great stillness was codified." I stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means he's not just a scientist. He's a heretical priest. He's clinging to an older faith," she explained. Short pause. "And every faith has a liturgy, a call and response. He thinks we're the enemy. We have to prove we are fellow apostates." She looked from me to the door,
a plan already forming behind her cold, intelligent eyes. "I know the response." The air in the corridor tasted of ozone and chilled metal. It was a sterile, dead-end artery deep in the architect's enclaves, a place Vespera had never been but knew by its schematic signature: isolation and security. Before them, a door of burnished, seamless obsidian drank the faint emergency light, unmarked and absolute. Above it, nestled in a recess of Gothic arched steel, a sentinel turret tracked their movements. Its single red optical lens glowed like a drop of fresh blood on a surgeon's glove. The low hum of its targeting system was a physical pressure in Vespera's ears. She felt Aris shift beside her, his breath a ragged cloud in the cold air, his impatience a palpable static. On her other side, Hroldar was a statue of coiled stillness, his gaze flicking between the turret and her, his expression a mask of profound, cynical doubt. He expected her to fail. He expected betrayal. In his world, it was the only currency with any real value.
A voice, scraped clean of all warmth and humanity by a cheap vox emitter, crackled from a hidden speaker. "You are trespassing in a restricted zone. Authentication has failed. You have 10 seconds to vacate before defensive protocols are engaged."
"Otho, we just need to talk to you," Aris began, his voice tight with desperation. The turret's hum pitched higher, its lens locking on to Aris.
8 seconds.
"No," Vespera's voice was sharp, cutting through Aris's plea. She placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of restraint that felt alien to her. "Let me." She saw the flicker of protest in his eyes, the deep-set fear that this was all a trap, but he subsided, giving a tense, minute nod. Hroldar just watched, his silence more damning than any accusation. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, Vespera stepped forward. She centered herself in the turret's gaze, offering herself as the primary target. The red lens shifted from Aris to her, the sound of its servos a soft, predatory whine. She could feel the weapon's potential energy aimed directly at her sternum, a promise of instantaneous, silent oblivion. The great stillness, weaponized. Her own teachings, the bedrock of her entire existence, screamed at her. Tranquility is order. Disruption is corruption. You are the corruption. The thought was a shard of ice in her gut. She was not merely breaking a rule, she was shattering the foundation of her world. For what? For this disgraced xenobiologist and a radiation-scarred scavenger? For a truth she wasn't even sure she could bear to look at? 5 seconds. She raised her chin, her voice perfectly level, devoid of the tremor that shook her from within. It was the voice of an architect addressing a subordinate, a tone of ingrained, unshakable authority. "Valerius Otho, that is your designation, not the shell name you hide behind now. 4 seconds. Final warning." The hum intensified. Vespera could feel the static charge prickle her skin. This was it, the point of no return. She had to unearth a memory she had been harmonized to forget, a ghost in her own machine she had spent years ensuring stayed buried.
"I was a level 3 technocrat in the Memoria division 12 standard years ago," she said, her words precise, clinical. "My station was oversight of synaptic log scrubbing for high-risk personnel reassignment, a cleanup crew for inconvenient histories." 3 seconds. She held the turret's unblinking gaze. "I remember a specific directive.
It was never published, never entered into the general codex. It came down from the first circle on a closed circuit, flagged for immediate execution and subsequent memory redaction from all involved parties. Aris was holding his breath. Even Hroldar seemed frozen, his cynical armor pierced by the sheer specificity of her claim. 2. The directive was designated Sanction 7B, Vespera said, the name tasting like ash and formaldehyde in her mouth. The unspoken sanction. The robotic countdown stopped. The single piercing number hung in the air, an echo of a threat that had suddenly become conditional. The turret did not power down, but its hum dropped a fraction, from a keen of imminent violence to a thrum of vigilant assessment. From the speaker, Otho's voice came again, but this time it was different. The robotic filter was still there, but beneath it was a new tension, a crack in the sterile facade. You are Echo lost. That designation does not exist. It does, Vespera insisted, her voice dropping, becoming more personal, more conspiratorial. It exists in the phantom limbs of the archive, in the gaps where a life used to be. It exists in my memory, Valerius, a memory I was supposed to have had erased. She swallowed, the act loud in the suffocating silence. Sanction 7B authorized the complete neural and civic erasure of one master architect, Cygnus Rask, your mentor, your predecessor. It cited ideological instability and resonance sympathy as the cause. He wasn't reassigned. He wasn't exiled. She paused, letting the weight of the next words settle before she spoke them. He was declared a non-person, deleted. And I was the junior technician ordered to execute the final command. I watched his name dissolve into a string of meaningless code. I am the one who helped the first circle murder his memory. The confession hung in the air, raw and irrevocable. It was the deepest form of betrayal she could offer, an admission of complicity in the very crime that had ruined Otho's life and sent him into hiding. It was proof. You don't lie about pulling the trigger on a ghost. For a long, agonizing moment, there was nothing. No voice, no countdown. Only the omnipresent low hum of Ethelgard's failing life support. The sound of a station slowly dying. Vespera stood her ground, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, every fiber of her being screaming at her to run. She had just signed her own death warrant if Otho didn't believe her. Then, a new sound, a soft click, followed by a low, descending whine. The blood-red light on the sentinel turret flickered once, twice, and then extinguished. With a final sigh of decompressed air, the weapon system retracted smoothly into its housing in the ceiling, leaving an empty, dark recess. A series of deep, resonant thunks echoed from within the obsidian slab. One after another, the sounds of immense magnetic locks disengaging, like the cracking of ancient vertebrae. A thin line of pale blue light appeared at the seam of the door, widening as the massive panel began to grind sideways into the wall. The sound was deafening, a protest of metal on metal that scraped at the nerves. It was the sound of a tomb opening for the first time in a decade. As the gap widened, it revealed not a brightly lit sanctuary, but a chamber of deeper, more profound darkness. The cloying scent of stale air, uncirculated for years, and the sharp metallic tang of powered-down server banks washed over them. A tall, gaunt silhouette stood just inside the threshold,
a ghost framed against the gloom. Vespera felt the tension in Aris's shoulders relax, replaced by a grim resolve. Hroldar let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity, a faint rasp of air that was almost a sound of respect. They were in. She had not only burned her bridges, she had shown him her ashes. And in this decaying, memory-haunted world, that was the only form of trust left.
The door to Valerius Otho's residence was an insult to the decay surrounding it. Here, in a forgotten sub-level of the Viridius spire, where fungal blooms painted the walls in eerie phosphorescent patterns and the air hung thick with the ghosts of ozone and rust, the portal was a slab of immaculate polished chrome. It had no handle, no keypad, only a single dark lens that seemed to absorb the corridor's flickering light. Vespera stood before it, her posture rigid, a stark contrast to Hrold's coiled tension beside her. The big scavenger's hand rested on the grip of his plasma cutter, his eyes scanning the shadowed archways behind them. For my part, I felt a thread of fragile hope pulling tight in my chest. Vespera spoke of Otho as a legend, the only architect to ever openly question the great stillness, the only one with the courage to call their ideology a cage. We needed a key, and Vespera believed he was it. She raised her hand, her slender fingers tracing a complex, invisible pattern over the sensor. An almost subsonic hum vibrated through the deck plates, and with a hiss of perfectly maintained pneumatics, the door slid open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the station's usual cloying sweetness of decay and recycled water. This was different. It was the dry, dusty scent of old data slates, the acrid tang of overheating processors, and beneath it all, the stale, unwashed odor of a body long confined to a single space. The air was hot and dead. We stepped inside. My hope faltered. The room was a testament to organized chaos, a library built inside a machine's carcass. The architectural bones were pure architect, soaring lines, vaulted ceilings, a single vast window showing the swirling blues and golds of the gas giant below. But every surface was buried. Towers of physical books, real paper and ink books, a treasure beyond measure, leaned precariously against walls lined with humming server racks. Cables, thick as serpents, sneaked across the floor, patched with electrical tape and prayer. Holographic schematics of neural pathways and complex star charts flickered in midair, glitching and stuttering. It was a prison of knowledge, and its warden was a ghost. Valerius? Vespera's voice was soft, hesitant. It was the first time I'd ever heard her sound uncertain.
From behind a mountain of jury-rigged diagnostic equipment, a figure stirred. A low muttering, too quiet to be a resonance echo, reached us. No. The signal degradation is too uniform. It's not decay, it's a filter, a suppression field. He emerged from the shadows, and I felt my stomach clench. This was not the defiant intellectual Vespera had described. The man before us was a husk. Valerius Otho was impossibly gaunt, his gray architect's tunic hanging from his skeletal frame. His skin had the pale, almost translucent quality of someone who hadn't felt direct light in years. His eyes, magnified by thick-lensed glasses, were wide, bloodshot, and fixed on a point somewhere 1,000 yards beyond the back of my skull. A fine tremor ran through his hands. I'd seen it before, in old-world studies. Neural degradation from prolonged, unfiltered interface use. "Stillness upon you, Valerius," Vespera said, the formal greeting sounding hollow and absurd in this chaotic tomb. Otho's gaze drifted, slowly focusing on her, a flicker of recognition, faint as a dying ember. Vespera. Lyrian. The prodigy.
They let you keep your memories, then. A rare honor. He spoke in a dry rasp, each word an effort. His eyes slid past her to Hroldar, then me. And you've brought strays. Hroldar bristled. We're not here for pleasantries, old man. Hroldar, Vespera warned, her voice sharp. Otho gave a dry, rattling cough that devolved into a cough. He smells of the rust gardens, of radiation and honest decay, a refreshing change from the perfumed rot of the spire. He turned back to Vespera, his attention already fraying. Why are you here? The Council of Silence doesn't send its prize technicians on social calls. Vespera took a deep breath, steeling herself. I am no longer with the Council. I'm here because you were right. The great stillness is a lie. The resonance, it's not a glitch. You knew. This, at least, held his focus. He tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. No. Child, I screamed it into their deaf ears. Resonance isn't a corruption of the system. It is the system. An emergent property of cramming 10 generations of neuro-ghosts into a failing biostorage network. A new form of consciousness blooming in the dark. His gaze drifted back to his monitors. But they didn't want a new flower. They wanted a manicured lawn. So they built a filter, a suppressor. That's what I'm tracking. The specific frequency of their damnation. He seemed to have forgotten we were there, lost again in his obsession. I saw a dark mirror in him, his single-minded pursuit, the way it had hollowed him out, leaving only the scaffolding of his intellect. He was what I could become. We want to expose it, I said, my voice louder than I intended. He flinched, his eyes snapping back to me. All of it. We know about the hidden archive. The foundational data from the original colonization project. We're going to steal it. Otho stared at me for a long, silent moment. Then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a terrible sound, brittle and broken. Steal it! Steal the heart of God! You fool! You absolute beautiful fool! Do you have any idea what you're talking about? The archive isn't a room full of data slates. It's a quantum state cold storage unit shielded by 6 layers of encrypted security and a garrison of architect Praetorians. It lies beneath the ossuary, at the very heart of their power. It's not a vault, it's a shrine. Hroldar stepped forward. Great, so you're useless. We thought you could help us bypass the security, Vespera said, her disappointment a palpable weight in the air. You helped design the core systems. I designed the cage, yes. Otho's voice rose, cracking with manic energy. I know every lock, every deadfall, every kill switch, and I know it's impossible to breach. It's an exercise in futility. His volatility was a flashing red light, a system-wide warning. He was too broken, too far gone. But as I looked at the flickering schematics behind him, an idea took root. He wasn't driven by rebellion. He was driven by data. What if you're wrong? I asked quietly. He stopped his pacing. You're looking for the suppressor frequency, a ghost signal you're trying to isolate from a century of noise. But you don't have a baseline. You have no pure, original signal to compare it to. His head snapped toward me, the tremor in his hands increasing. Go on. The foundational archive, I pressed, feeling the hook sink. It doesn't just contain the colony's history. It contains the first neuromaps, the first biostorage data before the population swelled, before the patches and the rewrites, before the filter. It contains the pure, unadulterated signal, your baseline, the key to your entire obsession." The air in the room shifted. Otho's manic energy didn't recede, it focused, condensing into a single burning point of light in his eyes. He moved toward me, his steps unsteady but quick. "The primary upload, the Kepler 186F colonists, yes, their raw neural patterns before the Aethelgard protocols were even drafted, the original sin. With that data, I could map the exact waveform of the suppression field. I could isolate it. I could reverse it." He wasn't talking to us anymore. He was talking to his God, the God of pure information. He began to pace frantically, rattling off security protocols, energy requirements, and quantum key encryption algorithms. He wasn't a leader, not an ally. He was a glossary of impossible obstacles, a roadmap of our own deaths. But he was also the only man on the station who knew the path. Vespera looked at me, her face a mask of weary resolve. The hero she remembered was dead. In his place was this broken thing, a tool we would have to wield, knowing it could shatter in our hands at any moment. We backed out of the room as he continued to mutter, already lost in calculations. The chrome door hissed shut, sealing him back inside his prison. We stood in the dim corridor, the silence heavy. "Well," Hroldar said, his voice flat and devoid of its earlier sarcasm, "that's a catastrophic liability we can't afford to lose."
The air in Valerius Otho's study was thick, with the scent of ozone and something akin to scorched parchment. It was a scholar's tomb, a space carved out of Aethelgard's decaying Gothic heart and insulated against its worst collapses. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed with a sickly green light from a terrarium in one corner, casting long, distorted shadows that danced over shelves crammed with forbidden data slates and relics from the colony that failed. At the center of the room, a holographic schematic of the ossuary levels shimmered above a desk of polished asteroid iron, its light painting Aris Thorne's face in ghostly blues and grays. He jabbed a finger toward a pulsating red node deep within the diagram's intricate latticework. "Here," Aris said, his voice straining to project a confidence he felt slipping with every word. "Level Omega. According to the fragments Hroldar found and the system charts Vespera salvaged, the primary access conduit for the original data archive runs parallel to this decommissioned cryo-transport tube. We use the tube for silent entry, bypass the main security checkpoints, and access the server nexus through this maintenance port." He looked from Vespera, her face a pale, taut mask of discipline, to Hroldar, who stood with his heavy arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he leaned against a stone archway. Aris then turns his gaze to the man seated behind the immense desk. Valerius Otho, the exiled architect, a specter in gray robes, watched him with eyes that seemed to hold the station's entire 187 years of decay. His face was a web of fine lines, his hands steepled beneath his chin, unmoving. "It's a data heist, Valerius," Aris finished, his own hand gesturing with a desperate energy. "A simple extraction. We go in, we retrieve the foundational archive, the station's uncorrupted birth certificate, and we get out. With that data, we can expose the truth of resonance. We can end this." The hum of the life support systems seemed to deepen in the ensuing silence. Hroldar shifted his weight, the worn synth leather of his jacket groaning in protest. Vespera's jaw was a hard line, her gaze fixed on her former master.
Then a sound started in Otho's chest. A low, dry rumble like gravel turning in a canister. It grew, catching in his throat before erupting into a full-throated laugh. It was a terrible sound, rattling and hollow, devoid of any joy. It was the sound of bones breaking. It echoed in the cavernous study, mocking the fragile hope Aris had so carefully constructed. The holographic schematic flickered, as if in sympathy with the old man's derision. A simple extraction? Otho finally gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of one eye. He rose from his chair, his movements slow but precise. Child. You are a brilliant biologist, Thorne, I will grant you that. But in matters of faith and fear, you are profoundly, catastrophically naive. He began to pace, his soft slippers making no sound on the worn metal floor. You see this? He gestured dismissively at the hologram. This is a child's drawing, a fantasy. You think the archive is a room full of servers protected by a few guards and a firewall? Stillness preserve us. He stopped before a section of wall covered in faded, hand-drawn blueprints. You speak of bypassing physical checkpoints, an admirable, if suicidal, ambition. His finger traced a line on an ancient schematic. The panopticon, as the devout call it, is not merely guarded, it is sanctified. The outer corridors are a kill-box of overlapping kinetic fields and pressure plates rigged to sublimation charges. Your decommissioned transport tube? It's monitored by audio sensors so sensitive they can track a single heartbeat from 100 meters. The guards are not the technocrat patrolmen you're used to evading. They are Praetorians, genetically and chemically loyal. They do not feel fear or pain or pity. They are instruments of the great stillness, and their only function is to erase dissonance. Vespera finally spoke, her voice sharp. The system protocols can be subverted. I know the access codes for— You know the catechism, child, not the gospel, Otho snapped, not even turning to look at her. His tone was not angry, but filled with a chilling sort of pity. The architect code you were taught is a leash, a set of rules to keep you useful and compliant. The code that protects the archive is a living thing, a data weaver. It doesn't just deny access, it learns, it hunts. The moment your rudimentary slicing tools touch its perimeter, it will not only know who you are, it will know how you are. It will turn every networked system in this sector against you. The lights, the life support, the very doors will become your enemy. He drifted to the fungal terrarium, watching the eerie green light pulse across his face. But even that is nothing. That is merely the lock on the door. He turned, his gaze sweeping over the three of them, but it was Aris he settled on. His eyes were dark, serious pits. The last traces of amusement were gone, replaced with a profound weariness. The final defense is psychological, he said, his voice dropping so low they had to lean in to hear it. The panopticon is the heart of our faith for a reason. It was built as an amplifier, a resonant chamber, not for sound, but for spirit, for memory. Aris felt a cold dread begin to pool in his stomach, a familiar chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled air. Hroldar had gone utterly still, his cynical mask finally showing a crack. You think the resonance events out here are chaotic, unpredictable? Otho continued. In the archive's core, it is a weapon, precise, personal. The moment you cross the threshold, the system will read you. It will sift through your mind, through your memories, your losses, your guilt. It will find the shape of your deepest regrets and give them form. You will not be fighting Praetorians, Dr. Thorne. You will be fighting the ghosts you brought with you. You, scavenger, he said, nodding to Hroldar, will face every soul who died in the rust gardens, their faces accusing you of surviving. You, apostate, he glanced at Vespera, will be judged by every architect you ever revered. And you, his eyes bored into Aris, you will find your wife waiting for you. Lyra. Not as a faint echo, but as a perfect, tangible recreation, begging you to stay, asking you why you let her die. The archive will not kill you. It will make you wish you were dead. It will make you stop. It will make you still. Otho walked back to his desk, and with a wave of his hand extinguished the hologram. The room plunged into a deeper gloom, lit only by the pulsing fungus and the emergency strips along the floor. The hope Aris had felt was gone, sucked into the vacuum of Otho's words. The heist wasn't just impossible, it was a perfectly designed trap for his soul. So you see, Otho said, settling back into his chair, the authority returning to his voice. You are not planning a heist. You are composing a suicide note. And I will not be a signatory. The old architect's patience had worn to a filament. Valerius Otho stood, his gaunt frame a stark silhouette against the glow of a dozen dormant data slates. The study smelled of dust and ozone, a dry academic scent that was a universe away from the cloying sweetness of the ossuary. His long skeletal fingers gestured to the heavy, sound-dampened door. The conversation is over, Otho said, his voice a dry rasp, the finality of it like stone grinding on stone. Your plea is noted and dismissed. I will not involve myself in a suicide mission born of grief and a scavenger's tall tale. Now get out. Hrodar's hand tightened on the grip of his plasma cutter, his knuckles white. Vespera stood rigid as a statue, her face an unreadable mask, but Aris could see the tremor in her hands. This was their only chance. Otho was the key, the one mind on Ethelgard who knew the architect's systems from the inside, yet despised them enough to help tear them down. No, Aris said, his voice quiet but sharp. The word hung in the air, a blatant act of defiance. Otho's thin eyebrows raised in weary surprise. No? You are a man of science, Aris pressed, stepping forward, ignoring Hroldar's warning grunt. You were exiled for it, for asking questions the great stillness deemed heretical. Don't dismiss this as fantasy. Look at the data. He held up the small, battered data chip Hroldar had found. It was a crude piece of tech, its casing scarred. Otho glanced at it with utter disdain.
A chip, plucked from the grime of the lower levels. You insult my intelligence, Dr. Thorne. You insult the memory of the man I once was. The truth doesn't care where it's found, Aris retorted, his desperation making him bold. He moved past the towering shelves of forbidden texts and antiquated physical books, their paper spines a shocking extravagance. He approached Otho's desk,
a vast expanse of polished dark metal and integrated consoles. Just look, 5 minutes, then we'll leave. Otho watched him, his face a landscape of contempt and deep, abiding weariness. But he didn't move to stop him. A flicker of something, not yet curiosity, but a predator stillness settled over him. Vespera took a half-step forward, a silent appeal. 5 minutes, Otho conceded, sinking back into his high-backed chair, which was less a piece of furniture and more a throne of self-imposed exile. Then my security drones will escort you to the nearest recycler. Aris's fingers trembled as he slotted the chip into an open port on the console. With a soft click, the system accepted it. He tapped a command, and a holographic field shimmered into existence above the desk. It wasn't a picture, not an image of a person or place, but a chaotic spray of numbers and waveforms, glowing in the station's ubiquitous shades of faded gold and surgical blue. "This is from Ossuary Level 7, Aris began, his voice finding its familiar rhythm of scientific lecture, a shield against the fear. "The suppression event 3 cycles ago. The official log, which I'm sure you could access," he glanced at Otho, "records it as a standard energy cascade, a failing cryogenic pod bleeding charge into the adjacent conduits. Simple decay." Otho waved a dismissive hand. "The station is dying, Doctor. Entropy is not a conspiracy." "I agree," Aris said, zooming in on a specific waveform. It was jagged, chaotic. "This is the official log's signature. A classic cascade pattern, predictable, meaningless." He swiped his hand through the hologram and the image changed. The new waveform was different. It was still complex, but beneath the noise, there was a structure. A pulse. "This," Aris said, his voice dropping, "is what Hroldar chip recorded from the suppression team's gear."
The air in the room grew heavy. The low hum of Otho's private life support seemed to deepen. The old man leaned forward, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. The cynical glaze over his eyes thinned, revealing the sharp, analytical mind beneath. "Harmonics," Otho murmured, almost to himself. "There are sustained harmonics. That's improbable for a cascade failure." Aris felt a surge of hope, sharp and painful. He had him. He had his attention. Now for the final, dangerous truth. "It wasn't just energy, Valerius. There was a manifestation. There was a resonance echo." Otho recoiled, as if struck. The cynical mask slammed back down, harder than before. "Echo lost delusions. I have no time for ghost stories, Doctor. The psychic pressures of this mausoleum are well documented. People see what they want to see, what they've lost. It is a known side effect of a failing civilization." "This was not a side effect." Aris's voice cracked with an intensity that silenced the room. "It had a voice. It had a form. It wore the face of my dead wife, Lyra." Otho stared at him, his expression turning to pity. "Then I am truly sorry for your loss, and for your sanity. You are unwell, Doctor. You need harmonization, not a conspiracy." "No!" Aris insisted, fighting to keep his voice steady, to drag it back from the precipice of grief and into the cold realm of science. "You're not listening. Don't focus on the face. That's just the interface, the template. Listen to the signal. It wasn't a recording. It was a transmission. It used a pre-existing neural pattern, a strong emotionally charged memory as a modulation key, a carrier wave for a much more complex signal buried underneath. It was attempting to establish communication." Silence, complete and total. Hroldar and Vespera might as well have not been there. It was just Aris and Otho, two scientists on opposite sides of a heresy, staring at the ghost in the machine. Otho slowly, deliberately rose from his chair. He walked around the desk, his movements stiff but precise. He didn't look at Aris. He looked only at the floating data stream, his eyes tracing the impossible patterns. He was no longer seeing a grieving husband's hallucination. He was seeing a non-human intelligence using a human nervous system as a broadcast antenna. He was seeing the validation for every forbidden theory that had cost him his life's work, his name, his world. The heretic's curiosity, long buried under decades of bitter resignation, was burning in his eyes. A modulation key. Otho breathed the words. His hand, thin and papery, reached out and passed through the hologram. The architects always assumed resonance was noise, a system error. They tried to filter it, suppress it, erase it. They never thought to decode it. He turned to Aris, and for the first time there was no pity in his gaze. There was a terrifying, ravenous hunger for knowledge. He saw a colleague. "Show me the decay rate of the signal's primary harmonic," Otho commanded, his voice low and intense. He was already at the console, his fingers flying across the interface, pulling up his own analytical programs. "Cross-reference it with the registered neural feedback loop of the source cryopod. I need to see the signal-to-noise ratio pre-suppression." He stabbed a final command into his console. A heavy metallic thump echoed from the direction of the study's entrance, followed by the soft whir of locking mechanisms. Hroldar tensed. What was that? Otho didn't look up from the data stream, his eyes fixated on the numbers Aris's chip was feeding his system. "The outer door is sealed," he said absently. "You are not leaving." Aris felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Otho finally looked up, his gaze boring into Aris, Vespera, and Hroldar in turn. "Not until you tell me everything."
The air in Valerius Otho's study was a lie. A carefully synthesized perfume of old paper and dried botanicals fought a losing war against the station's true scent, the cloying sweetness of chemical preservatives and the sharp metallic tang of recycled water. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, danced in the weak yellow light of a single sputtering lumen orb suspended over a massive desk carved from faux mahogany. Books, real ones with cracked spines and faded gilt lettering, were stacked in precarious towers, monuments to a dead world and a forgotten era of knowledge. It was a tomb, Aris thought, curated by its own living corpse. Otho sat behind the desk, a spider in the center of a dusty web. His fingers, long and impossibly thin, were steepled beneath his chin. He had listened to their desperate plea, for his knowledge of the ossuary's hidden pathways, for his understanding of the architect's security protocols, for a way to reach the foundational archive without a single interruption. His face, a mask of aristocratic ennui, had betrayed nothing. "The truth," Otho finally said, his voice a dry rustle of parchment. "You risk everything for truth." He unlaced his fingers and leaned back in his high-backed chair, the worn synth leather groaning in protest. A noble, if profoundly naive, motivation. Aris felt his jaw tighten. "It's more than that. The resonance, it's a perversion. The architects are hiding what it truly is. We need to expose it." "Do you?" Otho's eyes, pale and washed out, seemed to sharpen.
The academic languor fell away from him like a discarded robe. He rose, and the movement was not that of an old exiled scholar, but of something coiled and patient, finally deciding to strike. He was taller than Aris had realized, his frame gaunt but wiry beneath his faded velvet robe. "You, Dr. Thorne, you seek absolution for a ghost. You want to understand resonance because you hope it holds a key to unlock a cage of your own making." The words hit Aris like a physical blow. He saw a flash of Lyra's face, not as she was, but as the resonance had shown her. Flickering, hollow, her voice a distorted echo of a memory. He flinched. Vespera stepped forward slightly, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. "His motives are irrelevant. The fact is, the architects are lying. You were one of them. You know their methods."
Otho gave a thin, bloodless smile. He began to pace, his soft-soled slippers making no sound on the threadbare rug. "Oh, I know their methods intimately. I helped design half of them." He stopped before a tarnished silver frame, displaying a holographic image of a stern-faced woman. "Director Anaxium, my protégé. She was the one who cast the deciding vote for my retirement." His fingers ghosted over the frame's edge, leaving a clean streak in the dust. "She argued that my theoretical work on memory persistence was a threat to the great stillness, that I was flirting with the very chaos we sought to contain." He turned, and the predatory glint in his eyes was unmistakable now. "I will help you," he said, the words suddenly sharp, transactional. "I will give you the schematics, the backdoor codes, the precise timing of the security patrols in the lower ossuary. I will guide your every step into the dragon's den." Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over Aris. "Thank you. I am not finished," Otho cut him off, his voice like cracking ice. "I do not care about your truth, Dr. Thorne. Truth is a currency for saints and fools. I trade in a more tangible commodity." He returned to his desk, his movements deliberate, precise. He activated a dusty data slate, its screen flickering to life and casting a pallid blue glow on his face. "You will not simply access the archive. You will perform a surgical extraction for me." Hroldar, who had been leaning against a bookshelf with his arms crossed, let out a short guttural sound, halfway between a scoff and a laugh. "Here it is," he muttered, his voice dripping with cynical satisfaction. Otho's gaze flicked to him, dismissive. "My price is not negotiable. When you are inside the central server, you will divert a portion of your bandwidth to a secondary task. I want all of Director Anaxium's private correspondence from the last decade. I want the unredacted funding logs for Project Chimera, her pet initiative. And most importantly," he leaned forward, his eyes boring into Aris's, whispering, "I want the raw psychometric data from her last 5 neural harmonization sessions." Aris stared at him, the implications settling like ice in his gut. This wasn't about exposing a conspiracy. It was a character assassination, armed with the most intimate data imaginable.
"You want to ruin them," Vespera stated, her voice flat. It wasn't a question. "Ruin is such an unrefined word," Otho replied smoothly. "I prefer rebalance. They built their careers on a foundation of manufactured order.
I will simply provide the evidence to demonstrate the true cost of their stillness, the hypocrisy, the paranoia. The data you retrieve will be my key back into the fold, not as a supplicant, but as a kingmaker." Hroldar pushed himself off the bookshelf. "Oh, a kingmaker, and here I thought we were just grave robbers. So we do your dirty work, you get your revenge, and what? You install yourself as the new master of this garbage scow?" He spat on the floor, a dark mark on the faded patterns of the rug. "We're just trading one architect's agenda for another's. I'd rather trust a malfunctioning drone." "Trust is not required," Otho said, his tone unwavering. "Only desperation. And you, my large, unkempt friend, reek of it. Your plan to simply blunder into the most secure facility on Ethelgard is suicide. My plan is a scalpel. Without my knowledge, you will be caught and harmonized within the first hour. Your truth will be erased, your memories wiped clean, and you will become another placid, empty vessel serving the order you so despise." He let the words hang in the silent room. "My assistance is the only variable that makes your success even remotely possible." He was right. Aris knew he was right. The knowledge was a bitter pill. He had imagined this quest as something pure, a scientific and moral crusade, but the path to the archive was paved with grubby compromises. He felt a phantom whisper in his mind, Lyra's voice, distorted but urgent. "Whatever it takes, Aris, find me!" "We don't have a choice," Vespera said quietly, looking at Aris, her eyes acknowledging the foulness of the deal, but accepting its necessity. "His motives are a secondary concern. The primary objective is reaching the archive." Aris nodded slowly, the motion feeling heavy, disconnected from his body. He looked at the exiled architect, this bitter, vengeful man who held the keys to everything. The alliance felt like a contamination, another layer of grime on his already stained soul. But the thought of Lyra's echo, trapped in the machine, screaming for him, it eclipsed everything else. Redemption had a price. He just hadn't realized it would be paid to someone else. "Fine," Aris said, his voice hoarse. "You'll get your data." Otho's thin lips stretched into a triumphant, predatory smile. "Excellent." He tapped a command into his slate. A section of the bookshelf behind him hissed and slid aside, revealing a hidden alcove filled with flickering monitors and tangled skeins of fiber-optic cable. "Then let us begin. The first step in dismantling a fortress is to learn the precise location of its weakest brick." The percussive slam of mag boots on grated decking grew louder, a rhythmic metallic heartbeat counting down the seconds we had left. Panic was a physical thing, a cold acid rising in Aris's throat. The air in the ossuary's lowest level, the sump, was already a thick cocktail of formaldehyde and ozone. Now fear added its own acrid note. "Here," Valerius Otho hissed, his manicured fingers, so at odds with the grime, scrabbling against a wall panel that looked identical to 100 others. The fine fabric of the architect's coat was stained with something dark and viscous. "Curse this station's decay. The tolerances are off." Hroldar Brecker stood with his back to them, a bulky silhouette against the flickering emergency light. He held a heavy plasma cutter like a club, his head canted, listening. "Tolerances won't matter when their suppressors are frying our synapses. You have 5 seconds, architect." Vespera was a statue of pure tension, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. Her face, usually a mask of placid discipline, was now sharp angles and shadows. She wasn't looking at Otho, but past him, her gaze fixed on the corridor from which the sounds of their hunters grew. A groan of tortured metal answered Otho's desperate shove. The panel didn't hiss open, it screeched, scraping reluctantly inward to reveal a sliver of absolute, hungry blackness. A new smell billowed out, the dank mineral breath of stagnant water and century-old rust. "My escape route," Otho muttered, his voice a ragged mix of triumph and bitterness. "I never had to use it." "Glad we could be the occasion," Hroldar grunted, not waiting for an invitation. He ducked his head and vanished into the opening without a shred of hesitation. "Stillness upon you, you echo-lost bastards," he growled back into the sump.
Vespera followed, moving with a fluid economy that spoke of years of training. She cast one last look at Aris, her eyes unreadable. It wasn't an offer of comfort, but a command: move. Aris stumbled forward, his own feet feeling disconnected from his will. The darkness swallowed him whole. A moment later, Otho slid in behind, and with a final shuddering scrape, the panel was pulled shut. The world dissolved. Blackness. Utter and complete. The rhythmic stomp of the architect patrol was instantly muffled, replaced by a terrifying intimacy, the frantic rasp of his own breathing, the thundering of blood in his ears, Vespera's controlled exhalations just ahead. A constant, maddening drip, drip, drip echoed from somewhere in the oppressive dark. "Lumen," Otho's voice commanded, strained. A thin, weak beam of white light sliced through the void, originating from a device in the old architect's hand. It illuminated a horror of engineering. They were in a cylindrical maintenance duct no wider than a man's shoulders. The walls, slick with a black, greasy film, wept ribbons of condensation. Patches of sickly green bioluminescent fungi pulsed with a faint ghostly light, revealing a tangled mass of corroded conduits and thick bundled cables that lined the tunnel like the calcified veins of a dead leviathan. "Welcome to the sump's arteries, Doctor." Hroldal's voice echoed flatly from up ahead. "Try not to touch anything. Some of these fungi have opinions." Aris felt the walls pressing in, the low ceiling forcing him into a crouch. The air was heavy, wet, and tasted of metal and rot. He could feel the slick texture of the biofilm through the thin fabric of his jumpsuit, where his shoulder brushed against it. Each drip of water sounded like a footstep. Each scrape of their boots on the metal floor sounded like a betrayal. Drip, drip, drip. The sound drilled into his skull, and for a terrifying moment it wasn't water. It was the slow, steady drip of biofluid from the cracked cryogenic pod. Lyra's pod. No! He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image was already there, burned onto the inside of his eyelids. The shattered plasteel, the rime of frost within. His fault, his ambition, his failure. Aris. His head snapped up. The whisper was as clear as Vespera's breathing beside him, but she hadn't spoken. Otho and Hroldar were silent. It was Lyra's voice, a perfect echo of memory, or something else, something wearing her memory like a glove. His neural implant, damaged in the last resonance cascade, throbbed with a dull ache behind his eye. The line between reality and hallucination was no longer a line. It was a frayed, unraveling thread. "This way," Otho urged, his lumen beam bouncing nervously. "We need to get deeper before they deploy thermal scanners." They shuffled onward,
a miserable procession through the station's forgotten guts. The tunnel twisted, descended, and then split. Two identical dark mouths yawned before them. "Well," Hroldar's voice was sharp with impatience. "Left or right, architect? Don't have all cycle." The muffled sounds of the patrol seemed to amplify in the confined space. Aris could almost feel their proximity, a pressure against the back of his neck. They were being herded. "The left fork is shorter," Otho said, consulting a flickering schematic on his datapad. "It leads towards a sub-level access hub." "Too predictable," Vespera said, her voice low and certain. She hadn't moved, hadn't looked at the schematic. She was listening to the station itself. The harmonics of their boot falls are stronger from the left, even muffled. They're pacing the corridor above it. They know the layout. They're pushing us towards the hub. "We go right." Otho hesitated, his pride warring with the cold, undeniable logic in her voice. He, the architect, being corrected by a mere technician. But fear was a great equalizer. "Yes, the right conduit follows a primary coolant line. It will be louder, the thermal signature more muddled. It should mask our own. To the right." They took the right fork. The tunnel grew colder. The dripping intensified, and the low hum of the station's life support became a more pronounced, resonant thrum that vibrated through the soles of Aris's boots. He focused on the sound, on the feeling, anything to drown out the whispering echoes in his head. Just keep moving. Outrun them. Outrun her.
Suddenly, Hroldar threw up a hand, stopping them dead. "Still," he breathed. Up ahead, a latticed grate was set into the ceiling of their tunnel. A brilliant, sweeping blade of white light sliced through it, painting the opposite wall in a stark geometric pattern before vanishing. Then another sweep. A patrol's search lumen. They were directly beneath them. They stood frozen, not daring to breathe. Aris watched the dust motes dance in the intermittent beams, each one a potential point of betrayal. The light swept past a final time, and the rhythmic clomping of boots faded into the distance. They had passed over. Hroldar let out a slow, controlled breath. The best and brightest, the architects of silence, can't find a leak in their own sewer. He pushed forward again, but his movements were more cautious now. After another 10 minutes of claustrophobic shuffling, the tunnel opened into a small, cube-shaped maintenance junction, a nexus of rusted ladders and valve wheels crusted with decay. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they could stand up straight. The immediate sounds of pursuit were gone, replaced by the deep, sonorous hum of the station's machinery. Otto leaned against a wall, his chest heaving. He held up his datapad, its flickering light illuminating their weary, grime-streaked faces. A complex blueprint of Ethelgard glowed on the screen, a web of blue lines. A single red dot pulsed in a dense, unfamiliar section far below the ossuary levels. "We're here," Otto said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former authority. "Deep in the primary infrastructure conduits, 3 levels beneath the sump. They won't find us with a standard sweep." There was no relief in his words. Aris looked at the map. The red dot pulsed like a wound. They were safe for the moment, but they were more lost than ever, trapped in the station's deepest, most forgotten veins. Their destination, the hidden data archive, was a world away across a labyrinth of hostile territory. The panic of the chase had subsided, but in its place settled a cold, vast, and far more terrifying dread. They hadn't escaped.
They had only burrowed deeper into the tomb.
The service junction was a tomb for forgotten pipes. It pressed in on Aris from all sides, the corroded metal cool and slick against his back. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and the cloying sweetness of distant formaldehyde, was a physical weight in his lungs. Hroldar was a coiled mass of muscle and old resentment beside him, his knuckles white around the grip of a plasma cutter. On his other side, Vespera was unnaturally still, a statue carved from discipline and fear. The sound was what held them frozen, the rhythmic, synchronized clang, clang, clang of mag-locked boots on the graded walkway just beyond their hiding spot. A patrol. Not just station security, the cadence was too precise, too aggressive. Architects' enforcers. A beam from a searchlight sliced through the gloom, painting a transient, brilliant white line across the opposite wall, inches from Hroldar face. He didn't flinch. Aris held his breath, the frantic hammering of his own heart a deafening drum in his ears. "They're sweeping," Hroldar breathed, the sound a dry rasp. "Grid pattern. They won't miss this junction." Aris could see the logic of it, the cold, efficient geometry of their own doom. The patrol was moving slowly, methodically. Another 20 meters and their little alcove would be flooded with light. There was no other exit. They were cornered. He felt a familiar, cold dread begin to seep into his bones, the same helplessness he'd felt on the expedition, watching Lyra. He forced the memory down. Not now. Suddenly, Vespera moved. It was a fluid, decisive motion that broke the spell of their paralysis. She slid her personal datapad from a sealed pocket in her technician's jumpsuit. The device was an obsidian slitter. Its clean lines and soft, self-generated glow were a stark alien artifact in the filth of the junction. "What are you doing, Hroldar?" he hissed, his eyes wide with alarm. "Put that away! The light!" "The light is the least of our problems," Vespera countered, her voice tight, brittle. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the wall, scanning the tangle of conduits and data ports. She found what she was looking for, a maintenance node, its cover plate hanging by a single corroded screw.
With a surgeon's precision, she pried the plate open. A shower of rust flakes and dead insects fell to the floor. Inside was a cluster of fiber-optic jacks, one of them blinking a weak, intermittent blue. She produced a thin interface cable and with a soft hiss jacked her datapad into the station's nervous system. A holographic screen shimmered to life above the pad, bathing her face in an ethereal azure light. Strings of code, intricate and alien to Aris, cascaded across the display. He could see schematics overlaying one another, power grids, life support routing, security networks. She wasn't just looking for an exploit. She was navigating the system like a native. "They'll be on us in a minute," Hroldar growled, craning his neck to peer back down the corridor. The clanging was louder now, closer. Aris could hear the low thrum of their armor's internal systems. "Quiet," Vespera commanded, her fingers a blur across the hollow screen. Aris watched, a pit forming in his stomach, as he recognized the authentication protocol that flashed on the screen. It wasn't a hack. It was a key. Her key. He saw her full designation appear in pristine official script. Vespera Lyrian, Technocrat, First Order, Clearance Level, Alpha 7. "Vespera, no!" Aris started, the implication hitting him like a physical blow. "That's your personal clearance. They'll know. The moment you execute, they'll know it was you." Hrodar's head snapped around, his gaze shifting from the approaching patrol to Vespera's illuminated face. The suspicion in his eyes warred with a dawning, horrified understanding. This wasn't a clever trick. This was a confession, broadcast directly to the enemy. Vespera finally looked up, her eyes meeting Aris's in the blue glow. They were hollow, resigned. They already suspect, she said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the datapad. This just makes it official, a final act of heresy. She looked at Hroldar. You wanted to know if I was committed? This is commitment. Her thumb hovered over a pulsating red icon on the screen, labeled Cascade Initiate, Sector Gamma 7.
She's going to black out an entire sector, Aris explained to Hroldar, his voice laced with a strange mix of awe and terror. Not just a flicker, a full, cascading subsystem failure. Power, primary life support, everything. It's a Class 1 emergency. It will demand every available unit. Hroldar just stared at her. The cynical scavenger, the man who believed trust was a prelude to a knife in the back, was speechless. He was watching a woman methodically erase her own existence. She wasn't just breaking a rule, she was burning down the entire temple of her life and taking her name, her rank, her future with it. The patrol was 50 feet away. Their searchlights swept past the opening of the junction again, lingering for a fraction of a second longer this time. Vespera's eyes closed. She took one last shuddering breath. Stillness upon the void, she murmured, a twisted, bitter inversion of the architect greeting. Then she pressed the icon. For a second, nothing happened. Then a deep, resonant thump echoed through the very deck plates of the station, a bass note so low it felt like Æthelgard's own heart had just skipped a beat. The emergency bulb above them flickered, died, then flared back to life at half its previous intensity. A distant klaxon began to blare, its mournful, frantic cry echoing from a sector far above them. Through the open junction they heard a crackle of static, then a panicked voice from the patrol's comms. "Command, this is Enforcer Prime. We have a full-power cascade in Gamma 7. Repeat, Gamma 7 is dark, requesting immediate reroute." The reply was instantaneous, sharp and authoritative. "All units, disregard sweep protocols. Converge on Gamma 7 Access Corridor 3. Priority 1. Contain and assess. Move. Move now." The methodical clang, clang, clang of the patrol's approach was replaced by the frantic pounding thunder of running boots, the sound growing fainter and fainter as they raced away, drawn to the ghost she had created. Silence descended once more, heavy and profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of condensation and the distant fading siren. Vespera's hand was trembling as she disconnected the cable. The datapad's light vanished, plunging them back into near total darkness. Her silhouette sagged against the wall, her face a pale mask in the gloom. She had done it. She had saved them, and she had damned herself utterly. Hroldar let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. He looked at Vespera, his hard-bitten features unreadable for a moment. He lowered the plasma cutter, the weapon suddenly feeling obscene in the quiet aftermath. He didn't offer thanks or sympathy. Instead, he gave her a single sharp nod. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect. A soldier's salute to a fallen comrade from an enemy line. In Hroldar's world, it was more meaningful than any prayer or promise. Aris felt the shift between them, a new, fragile alloy of trust forged in the crucible of Vespera's sacrifice. She had proven herself not with words, but with an act of irreversible self-destruction. Vespera pushed herself off the wall, her composure returning, like a steel shutter slamming down.
The emergency protocol gives them a 5-minute diagnostic window before the system identifies the source of the command, she stated, her voice regaining its crisp, professional edge. When it does, they'll know my location down to this very junction. She looked at them, her gaze sharp and clear, the ghost of the loyal architect now fully exercised. We move, now. The heavy plasteel door hissed shut, the grinding of its worn gears culminating in a deep percussive thud that vibrated through the floor plates. For a moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the ragged chorus of their breathing and the ceaseless hum of the rust garden's failing life support, a sound like a giant beast in its death throes. Aris pressed his back against the cold, weeping metal of the wall, the adrenaline of their escape draining away to leave a hollow ache in his bones. His neural implant throbbed with a phantom echo, a whisper of static where Lyra's voice had been moments before. He took in Hroldar's workshop. It was a hoarder's den, a chaotic sanctuary carved from a forgotten maintenance conduit. Tools he couldn't name hung from magnetic strips, their surfaces gleaming with oil. Coils of fiber optics and power cabling lay in serpentine piles, nestled amongst stacks of salvaged data slates and scavenged drone parts. The air was thick with the smells of ozone, hot solder, and the sour tang of recycled nutrient paste. It was the scent of pure, unvarnished survival, a stark contrast to the sterile, formaldehyde-laced atmosphere of the upper station. It was honest. Vespera stood ramrod straight in the center of the room, her pristine architect uniform looking absurdly out of place, a slash of sterile white against the rust and grime. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her knuckles white. She was a compass without a north, spun loose from the only realities she had ever known. "Is this secure?" she asked, her voice tight, clinical. She was trying to impose order on a situation that had none. Hroldar, moving with the proprietary grace of a predator in its lair, slapped a panel by the door. A second series of locks engaged, their heavy clicks echoing like gunshots in the sudden quiet. He turned, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering for a moment on the disgraced architect Otho, who had sagged onto a crate of spare capacitors. "As secure as anything gets in this rust bucket," Hroldar grunted, wiping grease from his hands with a stained rag. "No network link, shielded conduit. The architects could walk a maintenance drone right past this door and its sensors would show an empty tube. Happy?" "Overjoyed," Vespera clipped back, though the rigidity in her shoulders eased by a fraction. Otho coughed, a dry, papery sound. The old man looked a century older than he had when Aris had first met him. The flight through the service tunnels had taken its toll. Yet when he lifted his head, his eyes were unnervingly bright, lit with the fever of a zealot whose faith had just been vindicated by apocalypse. "We are safe for now," he said, his voice a reedy whisper. "But now is a fleeting commodity on Aethelgard. We have acted. They will react with prejudice." Aris pushed himself off the wall. The ache in his skull was a constant reminder of his purpose. The resonance, the archive, Lyra. "He's right," Aris said, his own voice sounding distant to him. "They'll lock down the ossuary. If we're going to get to that foundational data, it has to be soon." Hroldar snorted. "Get to it? Son, you're talking about breaking into God's own vault. The architects built the core of that place to withstand a reactor breach. You don't just walk in."
"We won't be walking," Otho said softly. He fumbled inside his worn coat,
his thin fingers extracting a datapad. It was an old model, its casing scarred, but the screen flared to life at his touch, casting his gaunt features in a spectral glow. I retained certain access privileges, old ones, back doors I built into the system myself a lifetime ago. A paranoia that has, it seems, served me well. He placed the datapad on a cluttered workbench. Vespera, your biometric signature. It will be needed to bypass the initial handshake. Vespera hesitated for a heartbeat, a flicker of her old loyalty warring with her new reality. Then, with a grim set to her jaw, she stepped forward and placed her thumb on the pad's scanner. The device chirped its acceptance. "Thank you," Otho said, his fingers flying across the screen with an arthritic grace. "Now, let us see the shape of our damnation." He swiped a final command, and a cone of pale, shimmering light erupted from the datapad's projector. It struck the opposing wall, splashing across a mosaic of rusted panels and exposed wiring. The light coalesced, lines of silver and blue fire knitting themselves together into a three-dimensional schematic. It hung in the air like a ghostly jewel. The archive. The relief in the room curdled. The air grew thick, heavy. Aris felt the breath catch in his throat. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a vivisection. It was a layered defense, a fractal nightmare of interlocking systems. The outer shell, Otho explained, was a simple kinetic barrier, but beneath it lay the labyrinth, a series of shifting corridors and pressure plates, its configuration algorithmically changing every few seconds. Fail to navigate it, and the section you were in would be flooded with a neurotoxic aerosol that didn't just kill, but flash-cooked the nervous system inside the body. "Scrap metal gods," Hroldar breathed, his usual cynicism replaced by something akin to awe. "That's a slaughterhouse." Otho's finger traced the path through the shimmering lines of light. Past the labyrinth, you have the choir, a network of sonic emitters tuned to a frequency that causes catastrophic cellular resonance. It turns bone to dust. They are triggered by unauthorized biometric signals, even the wrong heartbeat. Vespera stared, her face a mask of pale horror. She knew the theory. To see it laid bare, to know she was planning to violate it, was another matter entirely. "This is Seraph-class architecture," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I've only read about it in the forbidden archives. It's not just defensive, it's punitive. It's designed to make an example of anyone who tries." Aris couldn't look away. He saw it not as a fortress, but as a cage, a series of locks on a box that held the key to his own shattered soul. The lethal complexity didn't fill him with despair. It filled him with a cold, terrifying fury. This was what they were hiding. This was what they were protecting. Otho pointed to a cluster of pulsing red nodes at the very heart of the schematic. "And here," he said, his voice dropping lower, "here is the final guardian. They call it the stillness engine. It doesn't use weapons. It projects a psychotronic field. Anyone caught within it has their short-term memory formation permanently disabled. You wouldn't die. You would simply stop. You would forget why you were there, what you were doing, who you were, in an endless repeating loop of the same 5 seconds until your body starved." The only sound was the hum of the projector. The 4 of them stood bathed in its ghostly light, their faces etched with the impossible truth of the task ahead. The adrenaline was gone. The hope of a simple victory was gone. All that remained was the cold, hard weight of what they had to do. They were no longer just fugitives. They were tomb raiders, plotting to rob the most heavily fortified mausoleum in the history of mankind. Aris looked from Hrodar's grim pragmatism to Vespera's horrified expertise to Otho's fanatical resolve. A fragile, desperate alliance forged in fire and aimed at an unbreakable wall. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The path was impossible. The risk was total. But it was the only path that led to the truth. It was the only path that led back to Lyra. He met Hrodar's gaze in the blue-green light. The scavenger gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The decision was made, unspoken but absolute. They would break themselves against this wall, or they would break through it. There was no other way.